the president is doing everything Vladimir Putin wants and nothing that American foreign policy dictates.
It's astonishing because when you read these words and listen to these words, these men are talking about duty and honor and country and freedom. Those words mean nothing to Donald Trump because all Donald Trump cares about, again, is himself. And we heard it even from his henchman, Sondland. Sondland talking about, he doesn't care much about Ukraine. He cares about those investigations and getting that statement from Ukraine about Biden. And this should appall all Americans and should appall especially Republicans, the party of Ronald Reagan, the party of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's absolutely bizarre that people can't stand up and just say this is wrong. It's not hard.
And please,
it's obvious.
Please note the emotion in their voices when they talk about Ukraine and cheering on Ukraine as a country in its battle with Russia, for starters.
What's so amazing is that they were fighting for the Ukrainians to honor and respect the rule of law. I mean, what's so amazing about the Trump sort of, if you can even call it philosophy, is it's completely upside down. He was corrupting U.S. relations with a country fighting corruption in its own recent history.
And we might just now see the price of loyalty because of what's going to happen to Ambassador Sondland. So
what's going to happen to him?
Well, criminal investigations, as Chuck and I know, you build by taking these depositions, getting their testimony. Now Sondland's already had to come back once and say, oh, I forgot some stuff. Here it is. Now he's going to have to come back and say, oh, I forgot about that call I had with the President of the United States on my cell phone.
From a restaurant.
From a restaurant, which is pretty hard to forget. But, and so now we've got a situation in which Sondland may have to flip effectively in order to save his hide.
And let me sound a national security note, because this testimony today helped me take something sort of from the abstract and move it to the concrete. Russia is attacking Ukraine in Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers are dying because of Russian attacks in their own country.
Yep.
In fact, I think Ambassador Taylor said that the incursion was roughly 7% of Ukrainians.
14,000 lives.
The equivalent of the size of Texas.
The equivalent of the size of Texas. So to the extent that this is just a president trying to get a statement from some foreign leader, completely misses the point. Ukraine is under attack. Their people are dying.
It's a war.
And it's a war. And this president wants something in return.
This is what he said just now. As we sit here today, it reminded me of Mueller saying Russia's attacking us as we sit here today. Ambassador Taylor started his opening remarks by saying, even as we sit here today, the Russians are attacking Ukrainian soldiers in their own country and have been for the last 4 years. I saw this on the front line last week. The day I was there, a Ukrainian soldier was killed and 4 were wounded.
So this thing that's happening in another part of the world matters a lot, not just to Ukraine, but as Ambassador Taylor said, they are our strategic partner, right? Ukrainian national security interests are our national security interests. What's happening there matters a lot, right, to NATO, to Western Europe, to Eastern Europe, to the future of the Atlantic Alliance. And people
goes to the credibility of the United States of America, right, standing up for the values that the United States of America we thought stood for.
But I believe Ambassador Taylor and Mr. Kent made it very clear that we have significant national security interests in this part of the world, and the President of the United States was leveraging that for personal political gain. That is, in George's word, astonishing.
It's astonishing, and it's just a direct violation of his oath of office. It's foundational. And this is the ultimate, and these are the words that we used when we wrote that op-ed when this scandal first broke, Neil. It's the ultimate impeachable offense. You can't, if you were going to make up a set of facts that was as bad as you could get, this would be it.
Like a law school test.
Like a law school test.
No,
like, think of it, a president breaching his duties to the nation.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.